Hello, hello, and welcome to the Weeder Life podcast. I'm your host, Erica Weederlight, and I am the CEO and founder of Weederlight. I help humans who feel inadequate, broken, self-conscious, and shamed around their sexuality to reclaim their aliveness, their power, and to have a renewed relationship to pleasure while preparing themselves to feel hella confident to date others and themselves. AKA, I'm guiding people to live their #best lives. I have to give you a fair warning. I do unfortunately swear like a drunken sailor, so if you do have little ones by you, just be sure to pop in some earbuds. All right, friends, let's buckle up and let's rock it to this week's episode. All right, we're back, and I am personally fucking psyched for this amazing, gorgeous human that I'm just like, oh, I can't wait to talk. I can't wait to have all the things. So without further ado, the amazing Charna Cassell. She is just a badass in so many different ways. She's an LMFT, a trauma-trained psychotherapist. She's a sexuality coach. She helps people find, heal pleasure within their bodies. And she's been everywhere. She's been in Oprah Magazine, Teen Vogue, In Style, Psych Central, AskMen.com. She is also the amazing host, so we'll do a double team. Listen to the podcast and then go listen to her podcast, Laid Open. She's amazing. She'll talk about her services later on. But in the meantime, if you want to double dip, you can stalk her at www.passionlife.org. Without further ado, we got to get into it. Welcome. Hello, my friend.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you for being here. And thank you seriously for what you do for this planet. You really help a lot of people move through their stuff and hold them and love them and witness them. And I'm just grateful that you're here doing the things.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You actually have 2 websites, so I'm going to include that in the notes so people can, you have a beautiful Instagram and 2 websites so people can look this up. And again, look at your website as we have this conversation. And something that I love within your website that someone might be so excited about and be like, oh my gosh, is that you do a beautiful job at bridging sexual positivity with healing trauma. And I think so often in our community, it could be like kind of parsed out separately. Like, oh, I'm either healing trauma or I'm sex positive. Like, we often don't see a healthy bridge. So I know we're like starting with quite the bomb of a question. So go in whatever direction feels juicy to you. But like, what the fuck does that even mean? But really what I'm interested in is like, how does one begin that journey? Like, what does that look like? Well,
so many years ago in my 20s, I worked at Good Vibrations. If people don't know what Good Vibrations is, it used to be when I was there, it was a co-op. It was a worker-owned sex toy store. And there was a lot of, it was like their little tagline is a well-lit place for, sex toys or something. Basically, we were very thoroughly trained as sex educators there. So it wasn't just coming in and buying a dildo. There was a lot of support and anatomy education and information and that people were coming in to get. And simultaneously, the person who was my therapist at the time was a woman named Stacey Haynes, who had written a book called The Survivor's Guide to Sex, which is now called Healing Sex. And it was a somatic, so approaching through the body, a somatic approach to healing sexual trauma. So I'd already been doing sexuality education. I'd been interested in that all through even high school and college and summer program at Wellesley College and, being a sexuality educator. And so that was my interest in working at Good Vibrations. I didn't realize how deep the training there was going to go on a daily basis with my customers and boundary crossings and all sorts of stuff like that, like really developing boundaries, because I was simultaneously doing a group and individual therapy with Stacey Haynes. So I considered my time at Good Vibrations boundary boot camp. Right. So here I was, I could be talking about cock rings or dildos or whatever it was, and really wanting to support people in learning about their bodies and what brings them pleasure and not feeling shame and having very direct, transparent conversations about these things. And then there'd be moments where I'd be gripped by like, why do people have sex? Like my own trauma. I was starting to heal my own sexual trauma in a very direct way rather than, I've been in talk therapy for over 10 years prior, but I never really directly touched on my nervous system and addressing my relationship to sex and how that had been shaped by trauma from childhood. So I had two different kinds of trainings going on at the same time. And I really felt like there was a way at times where my coworkers, it was all about like, listen to the pussy, like focused on pleasure, blah, 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 blah. And that where was the space for those moments of trigger and trying to understand and maybe even go really slowly. And there's these adult parts of you that may want to like, fuck. And then there are these young parts of you that may not feel safe, and how to talk to both parts.
Wow. Oh my God, I literally want to cry.
Oh.
I'm like 5 minutes in. I'm like,
that was a really long, rambling road answer to your question. Yeah.
No, it was perfect. That's what I want. That's what you're here for.
Yeah.
We want to hear from you. So why I'm emotional about that is I think you hit it so geniusly of like, we're so blessed to be in this community, but you know the deal. It's like, listen to pussy or listen to that, like, and it's like, that's great. And there's like such space for that. I'm so grateful we're in that space. And then there's also a huge part of the conversation we're missing that people could be triggered or like, they're like blacking out because it's so traumatic or, like, I'm so glad that you
There's
that.
so much around that topic. I'm in California, and One Taste was a community that's formed here. You're familiar with it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So, I mean, I had a boyfriend who was the lawyer for that community and was so traumatized by so many people were like, kind of like sex zombies. It's kind of a sex cult, I mean, there's some beautiful, the practice itself, some of the practices are so useful and I really enjoy them. And specifically, if people don't know what we're talking about, there is a certain amount of attention placed on manual touch as an avenue for listening to the other person's body and their energy and almost conducting it like you are an orchestra conductor, but instead you're touching their clit or stroking their cock. And it can be this beautiful, deep, spiritual listening and connecting energetically. But when boundaries are not permitted, which is some of what I really heard happened in that community, and overridden, you just get blown out. And so I feel like there always needs to be, consent and listening to the whole self, not just the genitals, right? Which was what was being promoted in that community and that I found problematic. And then there's this whole thing that can also be, so let's just define trauma. I'm defining sexual trauma beyond child sexual abuse and sexual assault. Right. So there are so many different kinds of experiences that you can have in your development that then impact your sexual self-expression or restrict your life force and your sexual self-expression. So you can look at whether it's developmental trauma, like growing up with an addict or in a physically or emotionally abusive parent, or whether that's a social form of trauma like racism, where you feel like you have to show up in a restricted way and squash yourself down so you're not threatening to the white folks in the world. There are all these ways that we constrict and restrict our breath, our physical bodies, and we squeeze ourselves in to have less needs and show up and be less visible so that we're not a target in a variety of ways. And if you look at that, you will see the way that connects to then how you're able to allow yourself to enjoy pleasure, express your sexual needs and boundaries, and show up for yourself. Right?
Yeah.
So, in terms of trauma and in terms of sex positivity, what I also see, which hurts my heart, is women in the sex positive community, or like if they have a toe in there and they're like, oh, I'm inadequate because I can't ejaculate, or I'm inadequate because I can't have a cervical orgasm, or I'm supposed to be able to do this. And the way that anything can be used, whether it's Christianity, whether it's, tantric sex or cervical orgasms, anything can be used and abused.
Yeah.
Right? And twisted into meaning something other than the original intention. And so it shouldn't be used to shame someone. It's like, oh, here's an opportunity and here's an opening. But what needs to happen if you have a numb cervix or a painful cervix? What de-armoring and healing because of social messages or, slut shaming or sexual abuse need to heal before you can have access to this other part of your body. And it could be your heart or it could be your cervix, right?
Right.
It's really irrelevant, like what part of the body it is. It just, that happens that as a global community, we have a lot of shame that lives from the waist down.
Oh my God, you just said so many good things. And I'm like, yes. Like I want to unpack so much because I'm like, and then this, and then this, and then this. Like there's so much goodness I want to unpack. But you just nailed something I wanted to talk about is the shame, right? Like, that also is like shame from family, like familial and cultural. And I love how you put it, first of all, this is important just because it's important. But I also love that you were talking about sexuality being connected to this is your life force. And I think so often we don't think about it. We have the stories of it's dirty, it's wrong, it's bad, it's this. And I love that you were talking about de-armoring some of that shame. Can you talk about, because I'm sure that comes up with clients, and you know the deal. It's like we could work on stuff, be like, oh, I'm shame-free. And then we hit something, we're like, oh, I didn't know this is up. Like, can we, again, a big question, but can you talk about what your practice is to hold shame, work through it? What does that look like for you and your clients?
It can look so different depending on the person and the stage that they're at. And as you said, if you can all picture a spiral and then you're starting on the outside, right? And then you're like, oh, I've healed all this shame. And then you go 7 years or 10 years and then you hit a little and you're like, wait a second, how am I here again? It's all the same stuff. And you keep circling through and you're getting closer to the core of these deep, deep wounds. And they have less charge and less hold over most of your life, but it doesn't mean they're not suddenly going to still come up.
Right.
So, for some people at the beginning, I'll give you an example. This is a very common thing. People have a hard time naming needs. If you grew up with, like, for instance, a narcissistic parent or a borderline parent who doesn't have room for you to have any needs that are separate from what they want, then it becomes so hard to, be able to communicate any of that stuff in relationship. So I had a client who he had to erase his needs growing up with a mentally ill mom. And so when I would just even say initially, when we first started working together, like, well, what do you want in this relationship? The way that it manifested for him was he would have these, it looked like seizures, right? Like his physical body, like an extreme tick, like his body would convulse. Like it would just get so afraid. This young part of him that was like, if I have needs, really bad things will happen.
Wow.
And his body would convulse. And what was incredible was to track that over time in our work together, because I was like, what if you could just think them to yourself, right? What if you could just write them down? Then what if you're able to say them in the room? Then if I use martial arts-based practices to help rewire the brain through the body. And those practices originate from Richard Strozzi Heckler created those at the Strozzi Institute for embodied leadership and coaching. And so the idea, just the way you learn how to dance or play the guitar, is that through repetition, you can create new neural pathways in the brain and body, right? So that you can remember new tools. And so rather than thinking like, oh yeah, like I want to have boundaries or I want to be able to do this thing, it's like actually physically training so that you can do it. And it becomes easier with repetition. And so the first time I do a practice with someone, it might be like their automatic embodied habit of the last 35 years is what arises, and they can't say no. Their body physically responds in a symbolic way. It shows me exactly what they do outside of my office with the people in their lives. And so they might get flooded by a certain kind of emotion and overwhelm. And so some of you may have heard of CBT, and it's like kind of exposure therapy, like doing something that's a little, your growing edge or what your challenge is. Let's say you're afraid of spaghetti, and then you sit and you eat a plate of spaghetti with the support of a therapist or something. I mean, I know that was an absurd example, but maybe there is someone afraid of spaghetti.
Yeah.
So that we would, do a practice, have the response, be with the response, and then ground and center again, do the practice, be with the response, and also have there be a reality check of like, oh, well, are all the bad things that you're afraid were going to happen happening right now as you tell me what you want? Just check it out, right? So, reality checking, being able to speak. So often when people are ashamed of something, other people get so uncomfortable in their presence and they then want to shut it down or make it better.
Yeah.
You know, oh, no, you're not, you're not stupid. You're not fat. You're not this. You're not that, like all the things. And instead of going, tell me all the reasons why you feel like you think you're so bad or wrong. Right. So creating room for that story to unfold and starting to help the person understand the bind that they were in as a kid. Right. Usually it's a kid. I mean, there can be so many things that happen in present day adult time, but I'll just use that as an example where it's like, if you hadn't done those things for survival, right? Like you really didn't have a choice in the matter, right? And a lot of the times kids blame themselves, like very commonly if a kid freezes during sexual abuse, right? Or doesn't fight back or doesn't run away or doesn't, very commonly in adult rape cases, right? Where what happens in your physiology is your voice literally can freeze inside of a freeze response. So when people are like, well, did you say no? It's like, well, your physiology was doing something to protect you. And that goes all the way back to animals. In the wild, if an animal's making sounds, it's likely it's still going to be attacked, right? Rather than if it plays dead or goes completely still, the perception is, oh, that's old dead meat. That's not tasty and healthy. I'm going to go elsewhere. So there's intelligence to our biology and how we're responding. And starting to do that education, doing the trauma education about like, what is our nervous system doing and why do we respond the way we do, and understanding and appreciating our responses rather than making ourselves so wrong for how we respond in a threatening situation.
I think that like right there is a super powerful statement, because I think, yes, you may work through it in therapy and someone may say, no, it wasn't your fault, but there's this internalized shame that so many of us carry. And so I'm so fucking grateful that you gave voice to that like the biology and all of that. Like, I'm so grateful. The physiology. Is that the right word? Physiology? Yeah. Okay. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
I mean, there's like lots of parts going on, right? Like
yes.
Our brain is responding and assessing faster than we can think. And then, yeah.
That's like super powerful that you gave that. So I'm like really, 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 really thankful. And I want to ask you this because I think, again, this is like such nuanced, and this might be a big ass question, but
yeah,
because this is a big ass conversation.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
How did you hold, if you feel comfortable, or you
Yeah.
can even talk about clients, like how did you hold the duality of both? And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like learning safety and grounding, but like how did you hold the duality of healing trauma and also like turn on and sexual, because I'm sure there was like a fine line of grounding and safety. And if anyone's listening to this conversation that's like, I want that, but like what is the fine line? Like how did you hold the duality of both at once? How do your clients hold the duality of both?
Absolutely. How do I hold the duality of two seemingly kind of different impulses? One is like there's this welling up of desire and desire to embrace my sexuality and have sexual freedom. And then on the other hand, there's all of this shame and need to heal trauma. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And how to navigate both of those. So I'll share personally about my own experience, because I think I shared a little bit earlier, which is I literally would have, and I'm going to share explicitly. So at Good Vibrations, we were required to watch certain porn, or not watch a certain amount of porn and read certain books, and so that we knew what the material was that we were selling, and we could educate people. We could know what was going to be right for people. And so even, and I lived really close to the store. And so I would even, there's porn watching, eating your sandwiches in the break room, or there was even like, I could walk home and make my lunch and masturbate and get to know the products, right? So there was this really great opening and education, and, and at the time I identified as lesbian, and I had only experienced my first partner using a dildo. I was like 24 years old. And so there was this whole world open to me, right? And I was, I read Carol Queen's books like Exhibitionism for the Shy. And I was getting really excited exploring and understanding what desire was, because my response to sexual trauma was actual sexual aversion. And also, to be clear, I liked boys. Then when I say boys, I mean actual boys. Like I was 5 and I liked boys, or I was 10 and I liked boys. And, fast forward to 27 or something when I'm training at the Strozzi Institute. And what I was recognizing and working at Good Vibrations is I wanted to have sex with men. I had a penis phobia basically. And I wanted to overcome that. And I really thought that having sex with cisgendered men was going to be an important part of my healing. And it was also a re-embracing of something, which is that I'd been attracted to them. And so that's part of my sexuality, but I felt so much shame. So what I had to do is I had to face a tremendous amount of shame the way someone else might around coming out as queer. For me, it was the opposite. It was like coming out as being interested in having so I initially was like, no, I just want to have sex with men. But then I was like, no, I love them. I have male friends. I love them. I want to be in relationships with men too. And so the process of working somatically, which is very much working with your body and opening your body, and not just like, if you're a smart person, you can talk yourself and your therapist in circles. And telling the same story again and again does not help heal your nervous system. You might feel heard and seen by a therapist, which is really important if you didn't have a parent who could do any of that. But in terms of healing the nervous system, you need to work with someone who's going to work with your nervous system. And working through the body is a way to work with the subconscious material that lives there. So it was like there were days where I was really grossed out working at that store. I was like, what am I doing? Why are people so gross? And there were a lot of boundary crossings with customers.
Right.
And at the same time, I had this space where I could track my evolution and my ability to not freeze when someone would reach out to touch me. And I could just eventually be really graceful and do like an Aikido move, just like step out of the way and keep talking about cock rings. And so it gave me a space to practice and keep embracing. So the way the body works, like your heart pumps and your breath goes in, it goes out. Your heart, it contracts, it expands, right? It's the same thing, so that we're opening. We have a big opening, and then we may have a big closing, and then we may have an emotional, right, or and physical. We experience it in the body, where we may share a lot with somebody, and then we're like, oh God, why did I say all those things? I'm so uncomfortable. Like that's the closing. Or we're so in love, and then something happens, and we're so devastated. So I think it's a both and. It's a moving between both things. And it's a patience in the whole thing of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's real, right? Whether you're healing from a physical injury in your, in physical therapy, or whether you're healing an emotional trauma and working with your physiology, it's the same thing. So it does ask a certain amount of patience. And you have to celebrate the micro successes, right? For some people, their systems move and heal very, very slowly. And other people, it looks more dramatic. And you can't expect your process to look like another person's process. And being self-responsive and listening to small boundaries inside yourself, like, oh, I wasn't hungry, so I stopped eating. Or, oh, I noticed I needed to go to the bathroom. Some people are that dissociated that they can't feel that they need to go to the bathroom. Or, oh, I actually really love that person, and 95% of me wants to hang out with them today, but 5% of me needs rest, and I'm going to choose rest, right? Like these teeny little things that we do that start to build trust with the part of ourselves that we blamed for the abuse or for whatever occurred, and like how bad we were, why our, mother beat us or whatever it is. It's like rebuilding trust that you're going to protect yourself and that you're going to take care of yourself. You're going to stand up for yourself, be your own advocate. And then that younger part that is more traumatized starts to feel more trust and safety. And as that safety comes more online, then it can be like, oh, okay, well, you want sex? Okay. Like you really need to get your least safe parts on board so that you're doing it from a present, connected place, rather than I'm going to override all these traumatized parts of me because I really want to have, transcendental sex.
Yes. Oh, I love that's I'm laughing and I'm like I'm nodding. It's so true because I was talking last week in the podcast.
Yeah.
And I did a solo episode, and I'll make this brief because people probably heard this if they listen in succession. But I was saying, you know, in my training, our teacher was like, you're going to have the impulse, right? Because it's like hot and it's cool to like shove the crystal dildo up you, you know, so you could be like, I had that experience, you know, like I did the thing. She's like, don't fucking do it, you know? And so she's like, I know you're going to have the impulse to just want to do it. She's like, but I'm going to invite you to put that by your leg. I'm going to have you put it by you and you are wearing your body. You might just want to hold it in your hand. But
yeah,
the cliff notes of this is like, it was not just go to the thing, go to the result. It was like, how do you want and getting good at that? And what I want to ask is, I'm grateful for this, but also I think it leaves people in a shame cycle is like right now, it's very Instagrammable to be like, listen to your body, listen to your body. And I'm thrilled because at least we know, like, thank God this is like part of the conversation, but people are like, what the fuck does that mean?
Yes.
Right. And then like, I feel shame because I don't know what that means.
Yes.
So can you talk to us like 101 if someone's like, I want that, but I have no idea what the fuck to do with that information? Like, where do they start? Like, how does that even start?
Yeah. I think that's an essential question. So again, what I want to paint a picture of, you have a little continuum, right? There are some people that feel everything. They're like a live wire, and it's hard to edit out other input. Like other people's information is coming in and activating the wire, and everything from the inside is activating the wire. And it's like, zzz, and there's maybe anxiety, and maybe there's anger, and maybe there's lots of turn on, and it's hard to breathe, and they go fast. And then you slide the little slider all the way to the other end. And that nervous system might be super slow and numb and heavy and depressed and slack versus tense, but might also be more grounded and sleep really well, you know?
Right.
And so, you know, we're looking at hyperarousal on one end and hypoarousal on the other. And there's more vigilance in hyperarousal and more dissociation and immobility and paralysis and hypoarousal. And so it's not a fair question to say, like, listen to your body, when it's like one person's job is, I have 17 people talking at the same time and I need to understand what's my body saying, but I can hear lots of things. And then the other person might be like, I hear nothing.
Yeah.
It's totally numb and silent. What the fuck? I'm so frustrated and impatient with myself. Those are the ends of the continuum and very common. And I see them both.
Yeah.
And so I really, again, like, you have to know what camp you kind of tend to hang out in. And it's not to say it's only one or the other, but there's strategies for survival. Like if I have antennas all over my whole body and I'm constantly tracking everything in the world, and then I know what's going on. And I had that, but I was also like, you don't affect me, motherfucker. And I could be really numb, and I'm a master dissociator. So both are true. But my besties tend to be more like numb. My friend Amy is somebody who, she was on a number of my podcasts early on, having conversations with me. And her lot in life has been to feel more, right?
Totally.
And to go through layers of like numbness to actually going, because, you know, she decided at a very young age that was the survival strategy that was going to help her out. And so there tends to be so much frustration, like as you narrated it, you're like, what the fuck? What do you mean listen to your body? You know, so coming back to that, meditation, the right kind of meditation, embodied meditation, not just transcendental where you're leaving yourself, you're avoiding your body, but kinds that are directed inward, downward, to feeling your sensations, are going to help you start to piece things out and quiet the noise. You know, so again, like the hyperaroused nervous system, like there's so much noise. How do you get quiet enough and still enough to decipher what is yours in this moment? Like, what do you actually need and want in this moment? Because we all have multiple parts that often are conflicting voices and ages and needs inside of us, and they're yelling different things. And then the other side is repeatedly coming back to energy follows attention. So you need to repeatedly bring your attention and awareness to a part of yourself before you can start to feel it if it's been numb. So whether that's your clitoris or whether that's your heart or whether that's, you know, your belly. And there's a lot of like how do you keep being kind to yourself inside of it? So there's lots of practices around it, but feeling your body, and I encourage you to take on some kind of physical practice. And remember, a practice is not a practice if it's less than 3 times a week.
Oof.
So minimum of 3 times a week, you want to do something. If you can do it 5 times a week, that's excellent. And even if you do it once a week, good on you. You know what I mean? Like, just like start where you are. And so meditation, that's one thing. Physical practices, some kind of physical practice. Maybe it's dance that's in a non-intimidating environment, because that can be a really judgy community depending on where you are in the world. Martial art, a kind of martial art. Internal martial arts like Qigong are really helpful at slowly thawing out and bringing more awareness. You know, I'm just a real believer in addressing the emotional, the physical, the spiritual, and the sexual all at the same time, right? Like, what are the practices? And sometimes your focus is more on one than another, but it's not just going to be yoga, right? That's going to do it all. It's like, okay, so how do you have a trauma-informed therapist or coach or body worker who's also helping guide you and support you? And sometimes I've had clients that are so numb, like, unless my hand is on their body, they literally can't feel themselves. And so you may need to feel yourself in relation to another person and have that help, right? And so,
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with you for that. You just remember, your body is so brilliant. It helped you get here. You're still alive. Good for you, right? You made it. And it's scary. Of course, it's scary to start to feel all the things that you haven't been feeling.
Right.
And that's the part. And like, make sure you have the support. You know, who's going to support you once you are feeling those things?
That's so helpful. Because like I said, it is such a, can be, if you don't have this knowledge, such a triggering question of like, just listen to your body. And it's like, what? Or, that's such an overwhelming task.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I'm so grateful that you voice that. That's like super helpful. Thank you for that.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think some people, depending on what your world is like, some of you may be going to like play parties or sex parties and, or even cuddle parties. And one of the things that annoys me, that I've been to a couple, and like where the conversation goes, we're going to talk about consent and remember to listen to your body. And I'm like, yeah, guys, that's great. If it's, you know, cuddle party 2.0 versus 1.0, where people really it's like they don't know what that means, and they're not trained in attunement, and they're not trained in listening to their own bodies. And so the people who aren't trained in attunement don't see the signals, and they go right in and swoop in.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people who aren't trained in listening to their bodies allow those people to cross their boundaries and can't set boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So there's just so much more nuanced training that's needed in the world of sex positivity and tantra than is commonplace, right? Everyone wants to skip to the hot sex scene. And if I'm watching a movie on Netflix and I'm looking for something to masturbate to, like, yes, I'm skipping, right? And that's what people want to do. But you have to really take a lot more responsibility for yourself and other people when you're in community and you're in relationship, right?
Yes. No, that's so good. And it's funny. I've talked about this so often, and, you know, and this is a sidebar, but especially the Tantra community, it's like very hot, you know, like it's hot and sexy. And so many people are entranced by that. And they're like, ooh, but it's like, God bless, if that's how you get you in, but you do the underbelly of the work, sure. But like you said, a lot of what this conversation that we're having is missed. And I'm so grateful that we're voicing this. And you talk about this a lot in your work. And I'd love to unpack this more. Like you said it even here today, like attunement, and a big part of your work is energetics. Can you talk about like how that plays a piece in all of this?
Okay. So I also want to make a disclaimer that all the things I've talked about, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. It's like shame and trauma. I mean, all the things are so big and there's so much, right? And so this is yet another one. So one of the places that we talk about attunement is around attachment work. So I'm trying to like, how do I talk about these things without going on 17 different, you know, digressive tangents. Yeah. And so there is a field that's focused around attachment, and attachment originally was focused around infants and caretakers. And they saw these patterns. This is a super, super superficial explanation so I can actually answer your question.
Totally.
Right? But, go Google attachment. So insecure and secure attachment are these big umbrella terms. And under insecure attachment, there's, anxious, avoidant. There's different terms depending on the person that you're reading, right? The theorist. But what they looked at was how well a caretaker was responding to what their baby's signal was. So let's say you're looking at a baby and you're not grounded and calm, and you're like, "Woo!" And the baby's little face is screwing up and its little head is turning away. It's like that baby is trying to regulate and not get overwhelmed, right? There's a reason the baby's doing that thing. And we don't grow up and grow out of the need to regulate the stuff that's coming at us and to us, right? So we have patterns that were established in the first couple of years of our life that then play into our dynamics in our adult relationships. And in our adult relationships, it's like, for instance, I'll give an example. I had a boyfriend who he realized, wow, you're really annoyed with me when I drink coffee. Like usually he had no filter and he would say really offensive things when he drank coffee, right? So when he's all hyped up and my nervous system, which is already very sensitive and like alive, really enjoys a grounded nervous system. Like with somebody else, it's like, let me just take a breath. Oh, that feels really good. Right? So if someone is already having a hard time, and let's just also acknowledge this is a generalization, but mostly cisgendered women, right? When you're quote unquote a little girl, you're already trained. It's like, here's a doll. You may not want a doll, but here's a doll, right? Like you're conditioned to take care and to attune. So attune means, what are the needs of the people around me? What's too much? What's enough? Like I'm Jewish. It's like, are you hungry? Do you want more food? I like to, like be a good host. And if you're not attuned, there's stuff that's going on in your own nervous system. It could be that you're a total narcissist and you're numbed out to anybody else's needs. It could also be you're managing your own trauma and you aren't grounded enough to pay attention to anything outside yourself. Or it could be you're really turned on and you're a boy conditioned to not pay attention to the needs of others. And so let's take it to a sexual situation. Very, very commonly. And I think this is a big issue that we condition girls to override and be nice in order to be liked, give people what they want. And we condition boys out of their emotions, be a man at 2 years old, right? And we also condition them to override their boundaries. It's like, what if they don't want to have sex? They're supposed to always be ready, right?
Yeah.
So there's so much damage that is done in how we condition young people into these gendered roles. And attunement, it's empathy. It's paying attention to the physical, right? What are the physical expressions? But then there's this whole other level. And I think that I was telling you a little bit about this, the work that I do, which is on an energetic level. I'll give you an example. I was working with a man who's really lovely, who gets really excitable, right? And he's poly, he has open relationships. And so there may be a situation where his partner is connecting with another person, but he's not attuned to it because he's like Tigger excited, bouncing around, and repeatedly gets the feedback that energy feels invasive or is too much, right? And so working with him to be more attuned. And I did a little practice with this guy where I had him, I'm like, okay, so notice what happens if you put I want to say he's sophisticated. He has a background in martial arts and a background in different kinds of energetic play. And so this isn't easy for everyone to do, but I invite you to try it on, where if you feel into what you're wanting and you put your attention in your head, right? Versus drop it into your heart, versus drop it into your low belly, below your belly button, your genitals, and then you ask for what you want from those places, there's going to be a different impact on the other side. So the person receiving is going to experience you differently, and how you ask and what you feel when you ask, you will ask differently. And if you take a moment to pause and go into any one of these energetic centers and feel the other person, you might sense something different.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
What are you attuning to if you pause, if you slow things down? It's not like a race to the finish. It's like, okay, how can we actually be with this delicious sensation, drop into ourselves, put, our level of excitement, hold it, but not be run by it, and then feel the person across from you.
Yeah.
And what's feeling good to them? What do they need in this moment? What do you want? Are they aligned? If you're a male-bodied person, cisgendered penis owner, and you're having sex with a cisgendered woman and she looks like she's glassed over, is she breathing? Pausing and stopping and checking in with her would be really valuable. Right? Can she receive you? Do you want to be received, or is you coming the biggest goal? Right? Like, what can she actually take in? Because if she's frozen and maybe she's offline, maybe she can't even speak in that moment, maybe she's triggered. And this is where all these moments of like, I didn't really, I thought we were just connecting. We were on the same page. And it's like, well, if you were looking and you were actually paying attention, maybe you would have noticed we weren't on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super helpful too, right? Because we sometimes give blind advice, like, just communication is key. And fuck yes. Like, I'm not taking anything away from that. Like, hell yeah, I fully support that message. And like you're saying, sometimes when you're in that state, you don't have the tools to fucking reach for communication.
Well, I think I could be wrong on this, but I believe it's 30% of communication is verbal and the rest is nonverbal. And so we are communicating. Communication is key, but what is being communicated non-verbally? And I have to give a shout out to my boyfriend, who is really, like, I'm used to being the one who brings up all the hard conversations and being more energetically attuned. And I'm impressed with him. Like, he calls me out because I'll energetically withdraw and get kind of like a little hard at times, if my feelings are hurt. And he names it in this gentle way. And then I'm able to reopen in this very sweet way, versus historically it was like, you're going to have to wrestle me and I'm going to have to cry to get on the other side of this hurt, like,
yes.
And I mean, literally wrestle me, like physically wrestle me, wrestle the sadness out of me, And so it's beautiful. I get to see my evolution, but I also feel like and he's like, firefighter and in the world of like dudes. So if he can do it, you can do it too.
Yes. Yes. That's such a good like homage in a way too, because we sometimes forget, because I'm thinking of like clip art of like communication, right? It's like just the mouthing talk. So I think we so often get lost in like communication. It's like, again, like you said, God bless, but that's only a percentage. And getting more attuned to, yes, let's keep that part of literally the conversation, but like, what about the other parts? Like, how can we get more attuned to that? That's so helpful. I want to eventually, in a few, transition to where people could find you. But before we did, because this was like our top hits in a way, like we did like so many different topics, like this. So I want to give you the spotlight before we transition to where people can find you. Is there anything else a topic that you want to round back out, something that you want to give, words to before we wrap? Because I know, again, we literally did like our top hits, like literally our Spotify top hits of the year. Like, we did not fuck around. So is there anything that you want to, like I said, extract, or anything else that you want to bring to the light? If you feel complete, all good, but I just want to give you the spotlight.
Yeah. My tendency, especially as a therapist, I think, is like what's still sticking in my mind, which I would have liked to talk to you about, is that image of you're in this course with this person who's saying you may want to shove this crystal wand up your into your body, but don't do that. And I was curious to actually have that conversation of like, oh, well, so what was being emphasized? Was it about like learning how your body receives and seeing how much of it wants to take in? Like, what was being trained in that moment? And so that was one of the only things that comes to mind in this moment for me.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you for asking that. That's actually really helpful. And that's also helpful if people listen to the last podcast episode. So they're like, what was that about? I think you hit the nail on the head of like not overriding listening to our body. Again, it was a little bit more fluff in 101, which is fine. But like the definition that you went into, you know what I mean? But I think especially since this course attracted a lot of people to just do the things, you know, like be perfect, be tantra, be this. And I think she was sensing that. So I think it was a way to kind of like ground us and of like, hey, also, if you feel uncomfortable, don't do some of these exercises. So I think it was a way to like ground the group. And then in addition, also not just like do this thing, like you said, receive the message from your body if this feels safe, if this is a green light or red light. So I think it kind of taught us grounding, but also and again, sometimes we didn't know because we also didn't have the former training at this particular course that you offer.
Yeah.
But it kind of gave the, how do I say it, the 101 version of, is this a green light or is this a red light? You know what I mean?
Yeah. What it made me think of was I was in a Jade Egg course. That was a 2-day course. And, you know, there's so much crap that it's gotten because of Gwyneth and just like, you know, superficial focus on what it could be about versus like a Chinese medicine practitioner who's teaching this course. And this idea of like, you know, you're using this piece of crystal and you're putting it inside yourself, but you're just holding it at the opening and you're seeing how far does this actually get sucked into your body? How much is it invited in? And that each little inch from the entryway all the way up to your cervix is relevant to different organ health in your system. And whatever your body is needing healing around, the egg will actually be sucked into that portion of the body. And so some people, it was like, whoop, right in. And some people, it was like, unless I force this thing, this is not going into my body. And so there's a way that the body is literally communicating and listening. You are listening to what it is saying in that moment versus forcing your foot into the shoe, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna make this fix. And I think that is relevant to if you're having sex with someone who has a penis that does or doesn't fit for you. I mean, this is something that I've seen, right? Where someone to accommodate their partner's size. And, you know, there are size queens out there that's great. And it doesn't always work for people. And, you know, like I had a client who had a chronic hip condition and pelvic pain because they were with someone who didn't fit them. And the way that they had to hold their legs in order to be penetrated over many years caused this chronic pain condition. And it was a deeper conversation of like, oh, you're not listening to what your body wants. Your body actually wants to be having sex with cisgendered women and not men and not this man and not in this way and not with this size. You know what I mean? So it was bigger than just him and his size. It's a bigger issue. But I just say that because there's so many ways that we go, oh, well, I just have to stuff what feels good to me and what doesn't work for me. And I just need to accommodate this person. And whether it's something inside your body or whether it's on an emotional level, there is listening, attuning to yourself, not just expecting someone else to attune to you that needs to happen.
Oh, you're so good. You're so good. I'm like, I would love, like you said, we're scratching the surface on so many deep things. Yeah. So more to come, more magic to come because you're fucking phenomenal. Yeah, I'm like, wow. So without further ado, tell people where they can find you, how they can be in your circle. How can people get in your universe?
Thank you. So Charna Cassell, CHARNA Cassell, CASSELL.com. You can find my writing and my podcast there. If you want to read more about my therapeutic work, you can go to passionatelife.org. I'm also at Laid Open Podcast, LAID, Laid Open Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And you can download my podcast called Laid Open Podcast. And I encourage you, if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. You can write to me at charnacassell.com. There's a place to submit questions that I'm happy to answer online. And yeah, that's how you can find me.
Again, more conversations to come, but thank you so fucking much for being with us today. It's such a good convo.
I appreciate your questions and your heart. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Seriously, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode and on this podcast journey. And if you loved what we talked about today and you know another human who could definitely benefit from what was discussed, I would so appreciate if you would go ahead and share this podcast with them. Don't forget, hit subscribe or follow so you never ever miss an episode. And the great news is you can always follow me, my work, my blog, my podcast on my website at www.wethelight.org. And hey, remember, life is so much brighter when we shine. I'll see you next time.